95% of the drawings you see in my videos are made from the tools that I will talk about. Well, first and foremost, I want to remind you that one of the most important tools at your disposal that you are trying to acquire is ultimately not a particular type of pencil or paper or whatever, but your knowledge and understanding. Because with enough skill, you can grab a handful of dirt and make art out of it. Now that being said, let's talk about the specifics of the actual tools that I use that you see in my videos. First of all, we have the charcoal pencil. I have the black and white charcoal pencil here. Though if you want to specialize in cartoon, comic, or anime drawings, you probably need an ink pen or something like that. But for me, charcoal pencil is definitely my main drawing tool. Even if you want to do a light outline, which graphite pencil does a great job at, you can still use soft charcoal pencil, and it works great. And I emphasize the word soft because I definitely prefer soft medium like soft charcoal and soft pastel. I'm talking at least for the charcoal, at least 2B or 4B. Even softer is fine. The benefit of this relates to both blending and paper, which I will get into in a little bit. Another tool that relates to this is compressed charcoal, and it is basically a block of charcoal that I use to shade a large area. Again, I prefer the soft version for the similar reason that I will talk about throughout this video. Color-wise, I like pastel pencils or compressed pastel. Most time I prefer dry pastel. Now, I prefer pastel over your typical color ink pencils for the same reason that I prefer charcoal over graphite. It really has to do with our ability to manipulate the medium. And like soft charcoal, a soft medium like pastel makes manipulating the medium that much easier. Now, the next type of tool that is pretty indispensable is of course the eraser. There are many types, but I only use mostly two types. First, we have what is called kneaded eraser. Here's one in my hand. And when you first buy it, it's like this. The main benefit and the most unique thing about this type of eraser is that it is completely malleable. It is like Play-Doh, which of course means you can adjust its size and shape to fit any particular need. You can make it flat to erase a large area, or make a sharp edge to erase a line, or a pinpoint to narrow down the focus even further. And this also goes back to why I like using soft mediums, because they are more receptive to erasers. Now, the second biggest benefit is that it is self-cleaning. What I mean is that unless it gets to a point where it becomes super dirty, for the most times, it can behave for all intents and purposes like it is new. And all you have to do is fold it onto itself a few times. Just play around with it, really. Basically, the particle sticks more to the eraser than it does to the paper, even if it appears to be dirty. Okay, the next type of eraser that I use is just your typical rubber eraser. Not anything special at all. You go to any store that sells pencil, paper, and eraser, and this is probably it. Now, the benefit of this is that it is much hotter, allowing it to sometimes erase more than what kneaded eraser could. Now, you do have to be more careful with this, because if you go too rough with it, it could crease or tear the paper. The key here is making sure the paper is firmly attached to the underlying drawing's support surface. And if possible, you can use your own hand to apply pressure and tension around the points to be erased. Another benefit to this eraser is that it can offer much sharper edges, allowing you to essentially draw white fine lines in dark shaded charcoal areas. And I'm sure you guys can figure out what part of my drawings often take advantage of that. And lastly, I want to emphasize a point, which is that while an eraser is certainly often used to correct a mistake, it is also as much as a drawing tool as the pencil. You use it to draw highlights, to fine-tune tone values. And for a lot of situations, it is often more effective and more efficient to use an eraser to achieve a particular desired effect. So don't see it as something that you only use to fix your mistakes. Okay, the next tool that I use a lot, and those of you who are familiar with my videos can certainly attest to this, is blending stump, or the technical name tortillon. And all it is paper rolled up to shape like a pencil. And it is of course used for blending. You know, the funny thing is, when I first bought my art kit, for the longest time, I had no idea what these are for. Did they give me like a fake pencil? Of course, during the course of my learning, I realized charcoal can be easily blended to create tones and effects that works super well for realistic drawings. And to achieve the same effect with a graphite pencil or something, it would generally take much longer. So there was a time where I started blending on my own, and I started using stuff like tissue paper, cotton balls to blend. And I'm thinking to myself all the while, I wish they had a blending tool. Meanwhile, this thing just sitting right in front of me the whole time, right? So my ignorance turned out to be a kind of a blessing, because in need of a blending tool, I ended up learning how to make my own blending stump that works much better than the ones you can buy, because the store-bought ones has some limitations in effectiveness due to how hard they are. And as far as I know, no one seems to sell a softer version, or I might just not found it yet. Let me demonstrate what I mean. And this is the reason I use two types of blending stumps. First is this type that you can buy from the store, and they all pretty much feel the same. This is how well it blends. Since it is very hard, it tends to push the particle deep into the paper, which makes erasing less effective. Now, this is the second type of blending tool I use. Like I said, this is self-made. It is much softer, and you can more easily cover a large area with it. And since you don't need to push down as hard, the particles don't get so deep into the paper. Though for smaller areas and tiny pinpoint fine blending on details, I still use those small, sharp, store-bought blending pencils. Now, this self-made blending tool, it is pretty easy to make. I mean, one of these days I can show you guys. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is a question I get asked a lot, which is what paper I use. Now, I feel like there are some misconceptions out there from some people asking this question. Perhaps because they think part of the reason I'm often able to create really smooth textures or able to blend the tones in a particular way is because of the paper, like I'm using some kind of special paper or something. Well, the truth is, I have used about 5 to 8 different types of paper just in my black and white art videos alone, and you can probably hardly tell the difference. I mean, the result probably all looked pretty okay to you guys. And the fact is, it is not difficult to make a smooth and realistic drawing on the back of a pizza box. My point is this: for charcoal and pastel drawings, while good art paper is valuable, and different papers with different densities, textures can affect the process of the drawing and its final outcome, what's most important is still how you are using the tools, rather than what paper you are using. You know, as long as you have some basic decent materials. If you can get top-end branded materials, great. But I'm saying that those don't play as much of a role in the outcome of a drawing as some people tend to think. Another reason that I don't want you to think you must have a particular type of paper in order to produce great result is that I use very soft mediums, as I have mentioned. Why does that matter? Well, you see, paper really works like this. If you zoom into the paper, right? You see the little grooves and textures and imperfections on the paper, basically how rough or smooth it feels. Those are called the paper's tooth. And that roughness is what grips the pigment particles and leaves the marks on the paper as you glide the medium over it. And generally speaking, a rough texture makes charcoal and pastel easier to stick to. But because I like to use very soft mediums, not only does this make blending easier, it also places less requirements on the paper's roughness to retain charcoal and pastel pigments. Even on smooth paper with very fine tooth, they can effortlessly retain the drawing marks. Another benefit of using soft medium is that it is easier to work in layers, even on smooth paper, due to how easily the medium's particles just tends to break off. This is an example from one of my videos. As you can see that I drew on the face a background layer first, and then I drew the detail on top of that. Now, the downside of using very soft medium is that they can get messy, you know, especially for someone not experienced. I mean, the slightest touch can leave a mark. You can easily make other parts dirty that you don't want to, and accidentally smudge the areas that you don't want to change. But again, those are all the things that can be avoided and easily fixable as you become more familiar and skillful with the medium. The next few tools that I recommend is more situational for you to consider. They could be very important to you. First, consider getting a pencil extender for obvious reasons. Next, a good support drawing board, so you don't have to hunch over in bad posture drawing on your desk. I mean, these days, people already spend so long hunched over on their computers all day, right? If you do that with drawing also, it can cause a lot of health problems to your neck, spine, and other areas over time. And lastly, if you tend to draw in a not very well ventilated area and you work with charcoal and pastel, I suggest you get a filter mask. Those are not expensive. It's the same kind of mask people often use in construction or woodworking. Breathing charcoal and pastel into your lungs is obviously not good. If you are just doing a simple drawing, it's not a big deal, but if you are doing a heavy drawing with a lot of particles everywhere, I highly recommend using one of these. Any questions, you can leave them in the comments, and if you'd like to work with me one-on-one with a guaranteed result, you can check out the link in the description. Alright, cheers guys!